Ha Lam never intended to text a billionaire. She only wanted her daughter to stop crying from hunger. But in the coldest, most desperate hour of the Saigon night, a single trembling slip of her finger sent her plea to the wrong person. A foolish mistake that would unintentionally, yet permanently, alter the trajectory of her life. The silence of 2 a.m. in the cramped boarding house was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and smelled of damp mold and ancient lime paint. Outside, the relentless rain of Saigon's rainy season drummed against the corrugated iron roof, a rhythmic pounding that usually lulled the city to sleep. But for Ha Lam, the sound was merely a backdrop to the terrifying rasps coming from the small bundle of blankets on the floor. Lam sat with her back against the peeling wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She was 26, but in the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the ventilation bricks, she looked 10 years older. Her hair was messy, tied back in a loose bun that was falling apart, and her eyes were rimmed with the red exhaustion of 3 sleepless nights. "Mama!" A weak whimper came from the blankets. Lam scrambled forward, her hand instinctively going to the forehead of her 3-year-old daughter Bong. Heat radiated from the child's skin, burning Lam's fingertips. The fever hadn't broken. If anything, it was climbing. "Shh. Mama is here, Bong. Mama is here," Lam whispered, her voice cracking. She reached for the plastic bottle on the plastic stool acting as a nightstand. She shook it. It was light. Too light. She moved to the tiny kitchenette, which was nothing more than a sink and a gas stove squeezed into the corner of the 20-square-meter room. She picked up the tin of formula. She turned it upside down over the bottle. A fine dust of white powder fell out, barely enough to coat the bottom of the plastic. She tapped it frantically against the counter, hoping, praying that some hidden reserve would dislodge. Nothing. It was empty. Lam stared at the empty can, her vision blurring. This was it. This was the bottom. Her ex-husband had left 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of gambling debts and a shattered trust. Since then, Lam had fallen from a promising junior analyst at a logistics firm to a woman who scrubbed dishes at a noodle stall in District 4 just to keep a roof over their heads. But the rainy season meant fewer customers, which meant fewer shifts. Yesterday, she had paid the landlord to keep him from evicting them. Today, she had nothing. Bong cried again, a high-pitched, thin sound that tore through Lam's chest like a serrated knife. It was the cry of hunger, compounded by sickness. Lam grabbed her phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of glass over the glowing display. Her thumb hovered over the contacts. She had one option left. Her cousin, Mai. Mai had helped before, but the last time she had thrown the money at Lam with a sneer, telling her she was a burden on the family's reputation. "I have no pride left," Lam told herself, biting her lip until she tasted iron. "Not when Bong is burning up." Her hands shook uncontrollably as she opened the message app. The cold dampness of the room made her shiver. Or maybe it was the panic. She didn't select the contact name. She knew the number by heart. Or she thought she did. In the darkness, with tears distorting her vision and her thumb trembling from low blood sugar, she typed the digits manually. 090883. She didn't double-check. She couldn't look at the screen for too long, or she would lose the courage to hit send. She typed the message, stripping away all dignity. "Chimai, I am so sorry to bother you at this hour. Bong's fever is getting worse and we are out of formula. I need 500,000, just for medicine and milk. I get paid on Friday. I swear I will pay you back. Please, don't ignore me. Send." Lam dropped the phone onto the mat as if it were burning hot. She buried her face in her hands, her body rocking back and forth. "Please, please answer." 5 kilometers away, in the penthouse suite of the HB Tower, the air was dry, cool, and scented with expensive sandalwood. Gia Huy sat in a leather armchair that cost more than the entire boarding house Lam lived in. At 32, Huy was the prince of real estate, the CEO of HB Group, and a man who owned half the skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. But tonight, the skyline offered him no comfort. It was just a sea of artificial lights, cold and distant. On the table next to him sat a glass of untouched scotch and a framed photograph turned face down. It was the anniversary. 3 years since the car accident that took his wife and their unborn son. Huy hadn't slept before 4 a.m. in years. He existed in a state of high-functioning insomnia, running a multi-billion-dollar empire by day and haunting his own apartment by night. He had cut off almost everyone: friends, press, distant relatives. His private number was known to exactly 5 people: his parents, his 2 vice presidents, and his chief of staff. So, when his phone buzzed on the glass table, the sound was jarring in the absolute silence of the penthouse. Huy frowned. He picked it up, expecting an emergency from the construction site or a family crisis. Instead, he saw a message from an unknown number. He read it once, then he read it again. Bong's fever is getting worse. Out of formula. I need 500,000. It wasn't a scam. Scammers asked for millions for emergency surgery or claimed they were stuck at the airport. They didn't ask for 500,000 dong, $20, for milk. And the tone, it was raw. It lacked the polish of a lie. It was a mother negotiating with her own shame. Please, don't ignore me. Huy stared at his reflection in the dark window. He should ignore it. He was a man who fired executives for missing decimal points. He was a man who had built walls so high no one could climb them. But the phrase, out of formula, stuck in his throat. He remembered the nursery he had built for his own son, the one that had remained empty for 3 years. He remembered the helplessness of standing by a grave, wishing he could give anything, do anything, to change the outcome. Here was someone who could still save her child, but she lacked something as trivial as money. His thumb moved before his brain could stop it. Is the baby breathing okay? How high is the fever? Back in the alley, Lam heard the buzz. She scrambled for the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She read the reply and blinked. That wasn't Mai. Mai would have said, again, or, I don't have it. Mai wouldn't ask if Bong was breathing. Confusion momentarily overrode her panic. Who is this? She whispered to herself. Then, realizing she might have texted a stranger, a wave of nausea hit her. She had sent her most humiliating moment to the wrong person. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm so sorry. I typed the wrong number. I'm sorry to bother you. Please ignore this. She was about to block the number, terrified the stranger might be a creep, when the phone buzzed again. You said the baby is out of milk. Does the baby have food? Lam stared at the screen. The text wasn't predatory. It was clinical, direct. She hesitated. No, but it's fine. I'm sorry. Don't lie. The reply came instantly. I have insomnia and money. You have a sick child and no supplies. Let me help. No strings. Lam let out a dry, incredulous laugh that sounded like a sob. A stranger offering help in Saigon? In this economy? It was insane. It was dangerous. But then Bong coughed, a wet, hacking sound that ended in a wail. Mama, milk? Lam looked at the empty tin. She looked at the phone. Pride was a luxury for the rich. She was poor. She couldn't afford pride. With trembling fingers, she typed her bank account number. She didn't expect anything. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe they would send 50,000 for a laugh. 3 seconds later, ping. The notification from her banking app lit up the darkroom like a flash of lightning. Account balance plus 20 million Vietnamese dong. Sender, G.H. Message. Take care of the child. Lam stopped breathing. She rubbed her eyes. She counted the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 20 million. That was 4 months of her salary at the noodle shop. It was enough to pay off the rent, buy formula for a year, take Bong to a real doctor. Her hands shook so hard she dropped the phone on the mat. This had to be a mistake, or money laundering, or a trap. She grabbed the phone and typed, her heart racing so fast it hurt. "This is too much. I only asked for 500,000. I can't pay this back. Please, send me your account number. I will return the rest." The penthouse was silent, but for the first time in years, Gia Huy felt a faint spark of something warm in his chest. It wasn't happiness, but it was purpose. He looked at the message. She was honest. Desperate, but honest. He typed back, "The money is yours. Consider it an investment in the future. Go to the hospital if the fever doesn't drop. Stop texting and take care of the baby." Then he put the phone down, face up this time. Lam didn't sleep. She couldn't. She ran to the 24-hour pharmacy at the end of the main road, buying the best fever reducer and a can of premium formula. She fed Bong, rocked her until the fever broke and the breathing steadied, and then sat watching the sunrise filter through the cracks in the door. She stared at the bank balance. It was still there. G.H. Who was G.H.? At 8 a.m., just as the alley was waking up with the sound of motorbikes and street vendors, there was a sharp knock on her metal door. Lam stiffened. The landlord? No, she had money now. She wasn't afraid. She opened the door a crack. A man in a sleek delivery uniform stood there, holding a clipboard. Behind him, 2 large boxes sat on the muddy ground of the alley. "Delivery for Ms. Ha Lam?" I didn't order anything," Lam stammered. "Instructions were to deliver to this address. Priority shipping." The man smiled politely. "Sign here, please." Lam signed, dazed. She dragged the boxes inside. She opened the first one. It was filled with cans of imported formula, the expensive Japanese kind she used to look at wistfully in the supermarket. There were diapers, packs of organic porridge, vitamins, and a set of soft new clothes for a toddler. She opened the second box. It contained basic groceries, rice, oil, canned meat, and a small envelope. Her heart pounding, Lam opened the envelope. Inside was a plain white card with a typed message. There was no logo, no name. "Don't waste your talent washing dishes. You clearly know how to count, given how quickly you calculated the difference last night. Go to HB Tower, District 1, tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for Miss Lan in HR. Tell her you are the referral for the junior audit position." Lam sank onto the floor, the card clutched to her chest. Tears finally spilled over, hot and fast. She looked at Bong, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, her belly full, her skin cool. She looked out the window at the slice of grey sky above the cramped alley. Somewhere out there, in that towering city of steel and glass, a stranger had reached down into the mud and pulled her up. She didn't know who G.H. was. She didn't know why he had chosen her. But as she wiped her tears and looked at the address of the most prestigious corporation in the country, Ha Lam made a vow. She wouldn't just take this charity. She would earn it. She would find out who he was, and she would show him that his investment was not a mistake. The game had changed, and Ha Lam was ready to play. The morning sun hit the pavement of District 1 with a glare that felt judgmental. Ha Lam stood in front of the HB Tower, her neck craned back so far it hurt. The building was a monolith of steel and blue glass, piercing the smoggy Saigon sky like a needle. It was a fortress of wealth, and Lam felt like a speck of dust at its gate. She smoothed down the front of her blazer. It was a relic from her pre-marriage days, retrieved from the bottom of a mothballed suitcase. It smelled faintly of camphor and desperation. It was slightly tight across the shoulders, and the fabric was shiny with age, but it was the only armor she had. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. For Bong. She had dropped Bong off at a neighbor's house for an hour, promising to return with news. But the instructions in the box had been specific. Bring the child if necessary. Lam hadn't dared. Bringing a toddler to a job interview felt like professional suicide. She pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was freezing. that aggressive, expensive air conditioning that wealthy establishments use to flaunt their power over the tropical heat outside. The floor was marble, polished to a mirror finish that reflected her worn-out flats. "I'm here to see Miss Lan," Lam told the receptionist, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist, a woman with perfect makeup and a gaze that could peel paint, looked Lam up and down. "Do you have an appointment?" "I was told to come. By the—" She stopped. She couldn't say, "By the man who sent me 20 million dong via text message. I have a referral." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, her fingers hovering over the phone. But before she could dismiss Lam, the elevator banks chimed. A woman in a sharp white suit walked out, her heels clicking with military precision. She held a tablet like a weapon. "Ms. Ha Lam?" the woman asked. Her voice was not unkind, but it was brisk. Lam nodded, clutching her purse strap. "Yes. I'm Lan, Chief of Staff to the CEO. Follow me." Lan didn't wait. She turned and marched back to the elevators, swiping a keycard that lit up the button for the 30th floor. Lam scrambled to catch up, ignoring the receptionist's stunned expression. The elevator ride was silent. Lam watched the floor numbers tick upward, her ears popping. "I don't know who you are," Lan said suddenly, not looking at Lam. "Mr. Huy doesn't usually hire personal referrals, especially not for the audit department. He hates nepotism." Lam swallowed hard. "I'm not nepotism, I'm—" "Lucky?" Lan finished for her, glancing sideways. "We'll see. The audit team is a shark tank. If you survive the first week, I'll be impressed." The doors slid open. The 30th floor was a hive of activity. Phones ringing, fingers flying across keyboards, the low hum of serious money being moved. But Lan walked past the rows of cubicles and stopped at a heavy oak door near the corner of the floor. She opened it. "This is the first stop," Lan said. Lam stepped inside and froze. It wasn't an office. It was a nursery. It was beautiful. Soundproofed glass looking out over the city, soft rugs, a crib made of mahogany, shelves stocked with high-end educational toys. But it was also haunting. There were no children. The toys were still in their packaging. The air smelled of sterile cleaner, not baby powder. "Mr. Hai built this 3 years ago," Lan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was expecting a son. He never had the heart to dismantle it. Yesterday, he ordered me to have it cleaned and stocked for a 3-year-old girl." Lan turned to Lam, her eyes searching. "Why?" Lam felt a lump in her throat. She realized then that the stranger, G.H., wasn't just rich. He was broken. I don't know," Lam whispered truthfully. "I truly don't." "You can bring your daughter here," Lan said, regaining her professional mask. "There is a nanny service on call for the building's VIPs. It's part of your package." Lam nodded, unable to speak. Childcare was the single biggest barrier to her returning to work. And just like that, it was gone. Now, Lan checked her watch, the sharks. The Department of Internal Control was less beautiful. It was a windowless room, dominated by fluorescent lights and stacks of paper that reached the ceiling. "This is the new temp," Lan announced to the room, then turned and left, leaving Lam stranded. A man sitting at the large desk at the back looked up. He was mid-40s, balding, with a face that looked permanently sour. This was Mr. Than, the senior manager. He looked at Lam's resume, or rather, the lack of one for the last 3 years. "A gap," Than sneered, tossing the paper onto his desk. 3 years, dishwasher, waitress, and before that, junior analyst at a logistics firm that went bankrupt. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Look, I don't know whose cousin you are, or which board member you begged, but I don't have time to babysit." "I don't need a babysitter," Lam said, her voice surprisingly firm. The image of the empty formula can flashed in her mind. She wasn't the scared girl in the rain anymore. She was a mother who had been given a lifeline. "I need a computer." Than scoffed. He reached into a cardboard box under his desk and pulled out a thick, dusty binder. He slammed it onto the empty desk in the corner. Digital records for the 2022 construction material imports are corrupted. We have the hard copies. Invoice matching. Identify any variance greater than 0.5%. He smirked. There are 4,000 invoices. I need a preliminary report by 5 p.m. It was busy work. It was a task designed to make her quit. 4,000 invoices in 8 hours was impossible for a human. Lam didn't complain. She sat down. She opened the binder. For the next 6 hours, Lam didn't move. She didn't take a lunch break. She didn't drink water. Her world narrowed down to columns of numbers. The office buzzed around her. Other employees, younger, well-dressed, graduates from foreign universities, whispered and giggled, casting side eyes at the charity case in the corner. Lam ignored them. She found a rhythm. The numbers spoke to her. They always had. Even when she was washing dishes, she calculated the cost of soap per plate, the profit margin of the noodle bowls. By 2 p.m., she noticed something. By 3 p.m., she was cross-referencing the invoices with a handwritten chart she had made on a notepad. By 4 p.m., her eyes were burning, but her heart was racing with the thrill of the hunt. At 4:45 p.m., the door to the department opened. The room went silent instantly. The giggling stopped. Even Mr. Than sat up straighter, buttoning his collar. Gia Huy walked in. He was taller in person than he looked in the few blurry paparazzi photos Lam had Googled the night before. He wore a charcoal grey suit that fit him like a second skin. His face was handsome but sharp, his eyes dark and unreadable. He carried an aura of absolute authority, mixed with a cold, distant exhaustion. He didn't look at Lam. He walked straight to Than's desk. "The Q3 projections," Hui said. His voice was a low baritone that commanded the room. "Yes, sir. Right here," Than stammered, handing over a file. Hui flipped through it, his expression bored. Then he turned. "Lan tells me we have a new recruit." Than laughed nervously. "Ah, yes, the referral. She's in the corner. I gave her the 2022 archives to keep her busy. She won't be in the way." Hui turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto Lam. Lam stopped typing. Her breath caught. This was him. The man who had sent the money. The man who had asked if her baby was breathing. But his eyes showed no recognition. They were cold, assessing. He walked over to her desk, invading her space. He looked down at the dusty binder and her notepad. "You're Ha Lam?" "Yes, sir," she said, standing up. She refused to cower. "Mr. Than gave you a task. Did you finish?" "Not yet," Lam said. Than piped up from behind. "See? I told you, sir. These untrained—" "I haven't finished," Lam interrupted, her voice cutting through Than's, "because the parameters of the task were wrong." The room gasped. You didn't interrupt a manager. You certainly didn't correct a manager in front of the CEO. Hui's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Lam picked up her notepad. Her hands shook slightly, but she steadied them. "Mr. Than asked me to look for variances greater than 0.5%, but that assumes the baseline prices are correct." She pointed to a column. "These invoices are for Grade A steel from the Vung Tau distributor. In May 2022, the market price for Grade A steel dropped by 12% due to the surplus from China. But these invoices," she tapped the paper, "show a price increase of 3%. She looked up at Hui. "The variance isn't in the math. The math is perfect. The variance is in the reality. Someone was buying steel at a premium when the market was crashing. On 4,000 invoices, that's not a rounding error. That's a loss of roughly 3 billion dong." Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Than's face turned purple. "That's ridiculous. You're a dishwasher. What do you know about steel prices in 2022? "My ex-husband was a contractor." Lam lied smoothly. Actually, she knew because the noodle shop owner had complained about steel prices every day for a year while renovating his kitchen. "And I read the Financial Times even when I couldn't afford to buy it." Hui stared at her. For a second, the mask slipped. A flicker of amusement, or perhaps respect, danced in his eyes. He reached out and took the notepad from her hand. He scanned her scribbles. 3 billion, Hai murmured. He looked at Than. You signed off on these audits, didn't you, Than? Than paled. Sir, it was a busy quarter. We relied on the vendor's data. A temp found in 6 hours what you missed in 2 years? Hui said, his voice quiet and deadly. He tossed the notepad back onto Lam's desk. He looked at Lam again. Closer this time. He could smell the faint scent of rain on her clothes, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes that mirrored his own. Keep digging, Hui said to her. Don't stop at 2022. Go back to 2019. That's outside the scope of my employment, Lam said boldly. I'm just a temp. Hai paused. He leaned in, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Then earn the permanent spot. Prove to me you're not a mistake. He turned on his heel and walked out. Lan, he barked as he exited the room. Get her a proper computer and a keycard for the nursery. As the door closed, Lam sank back into her chair, her knees weak. The entire office was staring at her, but the looks had changed. They weren't looking at a charity case anymore. They were looking at a threat. Up in the penthouse, 5 minutes later, Gia Huy poured himself a scotch. He unlocked his phone and opened the message thread. He didn't type anything. He just reread her last text. I will return the rest. No, you won't, he whispered to the empty room. You're going to pay me back in a way money can't buy. He walked to the window. The city looked a little less cold tonight. He had found a weapon to fight the rot inside his company. And perhaps he had found the first person in a long time who wasn't afraid to look him in the eye and tell him the truth. Ha Lam had her foot in the door. Now she just had to survive the storm she had just started. 3 weeks had passed since Ha Lam stepped into HB Tower as a charity case. She had ceased being a curiosity. She was now a ghost. She arrived before the cleaning staff and left after the security shift change. Her world had shrunk to the glowing rectangle of her monitor and the soft, safe confines of the nursery where Bong was thriving, growing plump on premium formula and the attention of the expensive nannies. But while Bong grew stronger, Lam grew more paranoid. The Department of Internal Control was a machine designed to rubber stamp, not to investigate. Mr. Than, the manager, had stopped giving her busy work after the steel incident. Instead, he ignored her completely, freezing her out of the main server access. But he didn't know that on her second day, Gia Huy, G.H., had quietly granted her admin privileges under a dummy account named Ghost. It was a Friday night, 9:30 p.m. The 30th floor was empty, save for the rhythmic humming of the servers. Outside, Saigon was a river of lights, oblivious to the war starting in the dark office. Lam was staring at a recursive algorithm she had built to track vendor payments. She had moved past the steel invoices. That was clumsy, sloppy theft. What she was looking for now was the artful stuff, the kind of theft that looked like legitimate business. And she found it. It wasn't a large transaction. It was thousands of tiny ones, small maintenance fees, consultant retainers, licensing renewals, all under 50 million Vietnamese dong, the threshold for senior executive approval. They were all flowing into a single entity, Red River Solutions, a shell company registered in Singapore. Lam clicked on the digital signature authorizing the payments. It wasn't Mr. Than. It wasn't even the department heads. The authorization code belonged to an override key, a skeleton key access that only 3 people in the company possessed: the CEO, the Chief Legal Officer, and the CFO. Lam traced the IP address used to approve the latest transfer. It didn't come from the office. It came from a residential IP in the ultra-exclusive Thao Dien district. She pulled up the personnel files. She matched the address. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just corruption. It was a family tragedy waiting to happen. She grabbed her phone. She didn't call the office line. She opened the message thread that started it all. I found the leak. It's not a drip. It's a hemorrhage. I need to see you. Now. The penthouse elevator opened directly into Gia Hui's living quarters. Lam had never been up here. It was stark, modern, and heartbreakingly empty. Hui was standing by the kitchen island, staring at a tablet. He looked worse than he had in the office. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a scar on his forearm. He looked like a man holding up the sky. You said it was a hemorrhage, Hai said, not bothering with pleasantries. Lam placed her laptop on the marble counter. She didn't tremble this time. The data was her shield. Red River Solutions, she said. Over the last 5 years, they have billed HB Group for strategic consulting. The total amount is 150 billion dong. Hui's jaw tightened. I've never heard of them. You wouldn't. The invoices are broken down into micropayments to avoid your radar. But here is the smoking gun. She turned the screen to him. The payments are approved every month at 2 a.m. on the 15th. The IP address belongs to 12 Orchid Villa, Thao Dien. Hui froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking grey and old. That's... His voice failed him. It's Mr. Tran Hung's residence, Lam finished softly. Your CFO. Your co-founder. Hai closed his eyes. He gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. Hung? No. He is my godfather. He sat by my hospital bed when my wife died. He runs this company when I can't get out of bed. I checked the metadata, Lam said, her voice gentle but firm. He isn't just stealing. He's leveraging the company's assets to cover personal losses in Macau. He's gambling Hui. And he's losing. Hui opened his eyes. The pain in them was raw, a mixture of betrayal and fury. I trusted him with my life. When I was grieving, when I checked out for 6 months, he told me he handled everything. He did, Lam said. He handled himself. For a moment, the billionaire and the former dishwasher stood in silence. The barrier of wealth evaporated. They were just two people who had been hurt by the ones they trusted most. Why? Hui asked, looking at her. Why dig this deep? You have your salary, you have the nursery. You could have looked away and stayed safe. Lam thought of her ex-husband, taking her savings and leaving her pregnant. She thought of the cold nights in the boarding house. Because I know what it's like to have your future stolen by someone who swore to protect you, she said. And because you helped me when my daughter was hungry, I pay my debts. Hai looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, not as an employee, but as an equal. The ice in his eyes thawed, replaced by a fierce intensity. We need proof, Hai said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not just spreadsheets. He will claim it's a clerical error or identity theft. He owns half the board. If I accuse him without a confession, he will bury me. Then we bait him, Lam said, her mind already racing. We create a fake crisis. Force him to move a large sum of money quickly. If he's desperate to cover his gambling debts, he'll slip up. Hai nodded slowly. You and me? You and me, Lam agreed. GH and the wrong number. Hui smirked faintly, a ghost of a smile. Dangerous combination. The next morning, the atmosphere on the 30th floor shifted. Lam could feel eyes on her, but this time the gaze was heavy, predatory. She was in the break room making coffee when the door opened. It wasn't Mr. Than, it was Tran Hung. The CFO was a man who oozed charisma. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a smile that disarmed everyone. He was the uncle of the company, the benevolent face to Hai's cold efficiency. He walked in, pouring himself a cup of herbal tea. Ms. Ha Lam, Hung said, his voice smooth like velvet. The new star of the audit department. Mr. Than tells me you have a frantic energy. Very admirable. Lam turned, clutching her mug. I just do my job, sir. Hung stepped closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and cigars. You know, Lam, may I call you Lam? This is a big company, complex. Sometimes when people look too closely at the pixels, they miss the big picture. They see errors where there is only strategy. The threat was subtle, wrapped in a smile, but it hit Lam like a slap. "I'm good with details," Lam said, keeping her face neutral. Hung chuckled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the counter. "You have a daughter, yes? Bong? Cute name. I heard you had some financial trouble. Debts from a runaway husband." He tapped the envelope. "There is 50 million in there, a bonus, for being cooperative. We need team players, Lam, not detectives." Lam looked at the envelope. It was more money than she had seen in years. It was safety. It was silence. She looked up at Hong. She saw the glint in his eyes, the arrogance of a man who believed everyone had a price. He didn't see a threat. He saw a poor single mother he could buy like a piece of furniture. "Mr. Hung," Lam said, her voice steady, "I think you misunderstood my job description." She didn't take the envelope. She walked past him to the door. "Lam," Hung's voice changed. "The velvet was gone. It was steel now. Accidents happen. Data gets lost. People get fired. Sometimes social services get anonymous tips about single mothers living in unsafe conditions." Lam stopped. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. The threat against her job she could handle. The threat against Bong. That woke the tiger inside her. She turned around slowly. "You're right, sir. Accidents happen. But I don't believe in accidents anymore. I believe in math." She walked out, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She went straight to her desk, her hands shaking, but not from fear, from rage. She pulled up the chat with Huy. "He made contact. He tried to bribe me. Then he threatened Bong." The reply came 3 seconds later. "Burn him down." The trap was set for Monday. Huy announced a surprise audit of the liquidity funds, citing a potential merger with a Japanese tech giant. It was a lie, but it panicked the ecosystem. Lam sat at her terminal, watching the real-time logs. She was the spider in the web. "Come on," she whispered, "move the money." If Hung was leveraged as badly as she thought, he would need to hide the deficit in the liquidity fund before the external auditors arrived. He would need to move money from Red River back into HB Group to plug the hole or move more money out to flee. At 11 a.m., a ping echoed in her headset. Transaction attempted. Source: Internal Reserve Fund. B: Destination: Cayman Islands Offshore Trust. Amount: 5 million USD. "Got you," Lam hissed. But before she could capture the log, her screen flashed red. "Access denied. User locked." The lights in the audit department flickered. "What's going on?" Mr. Than shouted from his office. Lam's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She picked it up. "You didn't take the envelope, Lam." Tran Hong's voice came through the speaker, distorted and cold. "I gave you a chance. Now, you are the thief." "What?" Lam stood up. "Check your email. Or rather, check the email I just sent to the board of directors. It contains logs of you using your admin access to attempt a $5 million transfer to an account in your name. Frame job, my dear. It's a classic for a reason." Lam gasped. She looked at her screen. It was locked, but the command prompt showed a script running under her user ID. He had hacked her session. "Security is on the way," Hung said. "Enjoy prison. I'll make sure Bong goes to a nice orphanage." The line went dead. 2 uniformed security guards burst through the doors of the department. "Ha Lam," one shouted. "Step away from the computer." The entire office stood up, staring. The whispers started instantly. "Thief, embezzler." I knew she was trash. Lam looked at the guards, then at the locked screen. She had seconds. She didn't try to unlock the computer. She grabbed the USB drive plugged into the back of the tower, the drive where she'd been backing up the ghost logs every hour on Huy's instruction. "Ms. Lam, hands where I can see them." Lam raised her hands. She looked toward the glass wall of the office. She caught Lan's eye in the hallway. Lan nodded imperceptibly. Lam let them take her. As they marched her out of the building, past the sneering receptionist, Past the shocked whispers, she didn't cry. She held her head high. Hung thought he had won. He thought he had cut off the head of the snake. But he forgot one thing. He was playing chess against a man who owned the board and a woman who had nothing left to lose. Lam was being escorted out, but the USB drive was safely tucked in her bra. And up in the penthouse, Gia Huy was watching the security feed, his face a mask of terrifying calm. "Let him feel safe," Huy whispered. "Let him think it's over." The knot had tightened. The empire was cracking, but it wasn't collapsing. It was about to explode. The sliding glass doors of HB Tower hissed shut behind Ha Lam, sealing her out. The humidity of the Saigon afternoon hit her like a physical blow, heavy with the scent of impending rain and exhaust fumes. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching her purse. The security guards had been firm but not rough, likely on Lan's orders, but the humiliation burned her skin. Passers-by stared. A woman in a cheap blazer standing outside a billion-dollar tower, looking like she had just been discarded. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications from the bank, account frozen. Emails from HR, termination notice. Tran Hung moved fast. He was systematically erasing her existence. A black Maybach pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching on the wet asphalt. The rear window rolled down an inch. "Get in," a voice commanded. Low, urgent. Lam didn't hesitate. She opened the door and slid into the leather interior. The car smelled of sandalwood and cold rage. Gia Huy sat in the corner, his face illuminated by the glow of his tablet. He didn't look at her. He was watching a live feed. "He called an emergency board meeting," Huy said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It started 10 minutes ago. He's telling them I'm mentally unstable and that I hired a mistress to siphon funds. He's moving for a vote of no confidence to remove me as CEO." Lam reached into her bra and pulled out the USB drive. It was warm against her skin. "He hacked my terminal," Lam said, her breath coming in short gasps. "He planted a script to make it look like I initiated the transfer. But he forgot one thing." Huy finally turned to her. His eyes were dark, rimmed with the sleeplessness that had plagued him for years, but the hopelessness was gone. In its place was the sharp edge of a blade. "He forgot that I'm a mother," Lam said, clutching the drive. "I document everything, every diaper change, every bottle, every penny, and every keystroke." She held up the drive. "This isn't just the logs. This is a screen recording of my entire session. It shows his remote access tool taking over my cursor at 11:02 a.m. Hai took the drive. He looked at it as if it were a diamond. "He thinks you're in a police car," Huy said. "He thinks I'm cowering in my penthouse." "Then let's disappoint him," Lam said. Huy tapped the partition. "Driver, the loading dock entrance. We're going up." The boardroom on the 45th floor was a sanctuary of power. A 20-foot table made of rare rosewood sat in the center, surrounded by 12 men and women who controlled the fate of thousands of employees. Tran Hung stood at the head of the table. He looked every inch the grieving statesman. He projected an image of a bank statement onto the wall, the fabricated transfer to Lam's account. "It breaks my heart," Hung said, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I have watched Gia Huy decline since the accident. We all have. The grief, it broke his mind. He brought this woman in, a dishwasher no less, and gave her keys to the kingdom. And now, she tries to steal $5 million. "We have to protect the company," one board member said. "We have to remove Huy, for his own good." "I have prepared the motion," Hung said, sliding a paper forward. "Sign this, and we can freeze his assets and stop the bleeding." The pen hovered over the paper. The air in the room was thick with betrayal. Thud. The double doors at the end of the room didn't just open, they were thrown open with enough force to crack the plaster. Gia Huy walked in. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked dangerous. And walking right beside him, matching his stride, was Ha Lam. She had wiped the rain from her face. She looked small next to the titans of industry, but her eyes were burning. "Put the pen down," I ordered. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. "Hey," Hung smiled, though his eyes twitched. "I see you've brought your accomplice. Security." "Security works for me," Hui cut him off. "And right now, they are downstairs escorting the police to the 45th floor." The board members froze. "You're making a scene, Hui," Hung said, his voice hardening. "You're unwell. This woman has manipulated you." "Manipulated?" Lam stepped forward. Her voice rang clear in the acoustic silence of the room. "You call it manipulation. I call it auditing." She pulled a remote from her pocket, Hui's presentation remote, and clicked. The screen behind Hung flickered. The bank statement vanished. In its place appeared a video file. It was grainy, a screen recording. It showed a mouse cursor moving on its own. It showed a command prompt opening. It showed the code being typed in remotely. Source IP, 12 Orchid Villa. The room went deadly silent. "That's a fabrication," Hung snapped, sweat beading on his upper lip. "She forged it." "Did I forge this too?" Lam clicked again. A new document appeared. It was a scan of a handwritten ledger. "You thought you deleted the physical archives from 2022, Lam said, walking toward the head of the table. "Mr. Than told me the digital files were corrupted, so I went to the basement. I found the original shipping manifests." She turned to the board. "Mr. Hung didn't just steal money last week. He has been inflating construction material costs for 5 years. He built this tower." She stomped her foot on the floor, using grade B steel while charging the company for grade A. He pocketed the difference. He compromised the structural integrity of this building to pay his gambling debts in Macau. The board members gasped. This wasn't just theft. This was liability. This was ruin. "Lies!" Hung roared. He slammed his hand on the table, his benevolent mask shattering. "She's a nobody, a street rat. I built this company." Hui stepped into the light. He walked until he was inches from Hung's face. "You didn't build it," Hui said softly. "You leached off it. And the worst part? You sat in my house. You drank my whiskey. You told me to move on from my wife's death, while you were stealing from the legacy she helped me build." Hai pulled out his phone. He pressed a button. A voice recording played over the room's speakers. It was from 30 minutes ago. "Enjoy prison. I'll make sure Bong goes to a nice orphanage." The threat hung in the air, cruel and undeniable. Hung's face turned the color of ash. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He was a trapped animal. I did it for the company," Hung stammered, backing away. "To keep us liquid. The market was tough." "The police are in the lobby, Hung," Hui said. "Don't make them come up here and cuff you in front of the shareholders." Hung looked at the board members. They were looking at him with disgust. His allies had evaporated. He slumped. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving a small, pathetic old man. "You were like a son to me," Hung whispered. "No." Hui turned his back on him. "I was a piggy bank." As if on cue, the doors opened again. 2 officers entered, flanked by Lan. She pointed a manicured finger at Tran Hung. As they led him away, Hung stopped by Lam. He sneered, "You think you've won? You're still just a temp. You don't belong here." Lam looked him in the eye. "I didn't come here to belong. I came here to balance the books." The doors closed. The silence that followed was deafening. Hui stood at the head of the table. He looked at the stunned board members. He looked tired, but for the first time in 3 years, he looked alive. "The motion for no confidence," Hai said, gesturing to the paper on the table. "Is there a second?" No one moved. "Good," Hui said. "Then I propose a new motion, immediate dismissal of the CFO and the appointment of an acting director of internal control." He turned to Lam. "Ms. Ha Lam, are you available?" Lam looked at the faces around the table, men who had dismissed her, ignored her, judged her. She looked at Huy, who was looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and something warmer, something that felt like a sunrise. She thought of Bong, waiting in the nursery downstairs. Safe. Fed. "I have conditions," Lam said. The board members blinked. Attempt making demands. Hai smiled. A real smile. "Name them." "Full benefits," Lam counted on her fingers. "Flexible hours for childcare. And overtime pay for the last 3 weeks. Double time." Hoy laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused, but genuine. "Granted." An hour later, the boardroom was empty. The storm outside had broken, and rain was lashing against the glass, washing the city clean. Lam sat in one of the leather chairs, her adrenaline crashing. Her hands were trembling again. Huy walked over and placed a cup of warm tea in front of her. "You saved the company," he said. "I saved my job," she corrected, taking the tea. "And maybe my reputation." "You saved me," Huy said. He sat on the edge of the table, looking down at her. "I was drowning, Lam, for 3 years. I let him steal because I didn't care enough to look. You woke me up." "You woke yourself up?" Lam said. "You just needed someone to send the wrong text message." He chuckled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You know," he said, tapping the screen, "technically, you still owe me 500,000 dong from that first loan, plus interest." Lam rolled her eyes, smiling through her exhaustion. "I just saved you billions. Call it even?" "Not a chance," Huy said, his eyes soft. "I'm a businessman. I don't write off debts." He leaned closer. "But I might be willing to negotiate a payment plan. Dinner? Tonight? I know a place that isn't a noodle stall." Lam looked at the man who had been a stranger, then a savior, then a boss, and now something else. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Hai replied. "The nursery closes at 6. Let's go get her." They walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the darkness behind, stepping into the elevator that would take them down to the ground floor and then out into the fresh, clean air of the aftermath. The storm was over. The empire was safe. And for Ha Lam, the dawn was finally breaking. The fall of Tran Hung. The fall of Tran Hung was swift, silent, and absolute. There were no more shouted threats, no more grand speeches. As the elevator doors slid shut on the 45th floor, taking the disgraced CFO and the police officers down to the lobby, the boardroom remained in a state of suspended animation. The remaining directors, the titans of industry who had been ready to sign Gia Huy's termination papers only minutes ago, now looked at their CEO with a mixture of fear and fawning admiration. Hai didn't gloat. He didn't yell. He simply walked to the head of the table, picked up the motion for his dismissal, and tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was the only noise in the room. "We have work to do," Hui said, his voice level. "The stock will dip when the news hits. I want a press release drafting a narrative of internal purification. We didn't suffer a scandal. We excised a tumor. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," the board chorused, eager to align themselves with the victor. Hui turned his back on them. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city that was slowly emerging from the rain. He was the king of the castle again. His power, absolute, his enemies vanquished. But when he turned around to look for the woman who had handed him the sword to fight this battle, the leather chair she had occupied was empty. 2 days later, the storm had passed, leaving Saigon bathed in a humid golden sunshine. The headlines were screaming about the billion-dollar cleanup at HB Group. Gia Huy was being hailed as a visionary leader who valued integrity over profit. Down on the 30th floor, in the corner of the audit department, Ha Lam was packing a cardboard box. It didn't take long. She didn't have much. A coffee mug, a framed photo of Bong, a small cactus she had bought to brighten up the grey desk, and the notepad that had started it all. The office was buzzing. People were whispering, pointing. That's her, the Dragon Slayer. But no one approached her. She had become a legend, and legends were intimidating. Lam placed the stapler in the box. She felt a heavy, dull ache in her chest. She told herself it was relief. She had done what she came to do. She had proven she wasn't useless. She had cleared her name. But as she looked through the glass partition toward the nursery, where Bong was napping with her favorite stuffed fox, Lam knew she was lying to herself. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because she was afraid to stay. She was a temp, a single mother from a boarding house. Huy was a billionaire. The adrenaline of the war had blurred the lines between them. But now that the peace had returned, the walls were going back up. She didn't want to be the subject of office gossip. The charity case kept around as a trophy. Going somewhere? The voice was low, familiar, and made her heart skip a beat. Lam froze. She turned around. Gia Huy was standing there. He wasn't surrounded by his entourage. He wasn't wearing his jacket. He was leaning against the doorframe of her cubicle, hands in his pockets, looking relaxed in a way she had never seen before. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. "I finished the transition reports," Lam said, her voice sounding small in the quiet office. "I organized the files for the new team. My contract, well, the temp contract is technically void now that the investigation is over." She picked up the box. "I think it's best if I go. You don't need the distraction. The press is already asking questions about who found the data. If they find out it was a dishwasher you hired via text message..." She forced a laugh. "It won't look good for the stock price." She tried to step past him, but he didn't move. He blocked her path, not aggressively, but firmly. "Put the box down, Lam," he said. "Hi, really, it's..." "Put it down." Lam hesitated, then slowly lowered the box back onto the desk. She kept her eyes on her shoes, afraid that if she looked at him, her resolve would crumble. Hai stepped into the small cubicle. The space suddenly felt very intimate. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the HB Group seal. He placed it on top of her box. "Open it." Lam wiped her palms on her skirt. She opened the envelope. Inside was a contract. It wasn't a temp agreement. Position: Director of Internal Control. Report line: direct to CEO. Salary: a number that made Lam's eyes widen. Sign on: bonus: immediate. Lam stared at the words. Director. "I don't need a yes man in this role," Hai said softly, his voice rumbling in the small space. "I had a friend in that role, and he nearly destroyed me. I don't need someone with a PhD from Harvard who knows how to hide numbers. I need someone who looks at a spreadsheet and sees the truth. I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." He took a step closer. "I need you." Lam looked up then. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was respect. Professional, deep, undeniable respect. "Director," she whispered. "That's a big jump." "You saved the company," Hai shrugged. "Consider it a promotion based on merit. Plus, you already know where the bodies are buried. I can't let you leave." Lam felt the tears pricking her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a victim, not as a struggle, but as a force. "I'll take it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I want full autonomy, and I pick my own team. No more Mr. Thans." "Thong was fired this morning," Huy smirked. "Build your own army." They stood there for a moment, the contract lying between them, a bridge over the chasm of their different worlds. Hai glanced over Lam's shoulder, through the glass, to the nursery. Bong was stirring, sitting up in the crib, rubbing her eyes. Hai's expression softened. The CEO vanished, replaced by the man who had lost a child and found a sliver of redemption in saving another. "There is one more clause to the offer," Huy said, his voice hesitating for the first time. "Oh?" Lam raised an eyebrow, her business mode kicking back in. "Stock options? Dental?" Huy rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncharacteristically shy. "I was wondering," he started, looking at the floor and then back at her. If we could get dinner tonight, you, me, and Bong." Lam blinked. Not a business dinner, Huy clarified quickly. And not as your boss, just as the guy who accidentally transferred 20 million dong to the wrong number because he was lonely and you were brave. The office seemed to fade away. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with possibility. Lam looked at this man, this powerful, broken, brilliant man who had rebuilt himself alongside her. She thought about the night she sat on the floor in the dark, praying for a miracle. She thought about the text message. Is the baby breathing okay? She realized that he hadn't just saved her. She had saved him too. She had given him a reason to care again. A smile broke across Lam's face, radiant, genuine, and full of light. It transformed her from the tired survivor into the beautiful young woman she had forgotten she was. Dinner sounds good, she said. Huy let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. He smiled back, and it reached his eyes. Great, I know a place. Italian, kid-friendly? Good. Lam nodded, picking up her pen to sign the contract. She paused, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eye. But let's be clear about one thing, Mr. CEO. What's that? The bill, Lam said, tapping the contract. I'm paying for my share, and I'm still deducting the remainder of that 20 million debt from my first paycheck. Hai laughed aloud. You are stubborn. I'm an auditor, she corrected. I balance the books. Huy shook his head, looking at her with something that looked dangerously like affection. Fine. You pay the debt, but I'm buying the dessert. Deal. Lam signed the paper with a flourish. 10 minutes later, the employees of HB Group watched in stunned silence as their CEO walked through the lobby carrying a sleeping toddler in one arm and a diaper bag in the other. Walking beside him, head held high, was their new Director of Internal Control. They stepped out into the Saigon evening. The air was warm. The city lights were twinkling. The noise of the traffic didn't sound like chaos anymore. It sounded like a melody. Lam looked at Huy, who was carefully adjusting Bong's blanket. She touched the cheap silver necklace she wore, the one her mother gave her, and made a silent wish. She didn't know exactly what the future held. There would be hard days. There would be new audits, new battles, and the complex dance of navigating a relationship that started with a mistake. But as Huy opened the car door for her and smiled, Ha Lam knew one thing for certain. It wasn't a wrong number. It was the only right number she had ever dialed.